So Vicki, tell me, of all of the issues that confront teachers in a school, what if you had a message that you could give teachers about something that they could do to improve learning overall, and in particular reading, what are some pieces of advice that you would give those teachers?
I think I would really advise them to collaborate with one another. In our schools, just like when we talk about our classrooms, the kind of readers that come into our classrooms who have different levels of language development, language proficiency, in our school setting, we have different teachers who have different levels of knowledge about reading. But within a school setting, there is so much wealth of knowledge that exists that a lot of times I think we do not know what a teacher might be doing in his or her classroom that is very effective. The goal with improving the reading achievement of all students is to build teacher expertise and teacher capacity at the school level. And I believe one way to build teacher capacity is, of course, through every teacher improving on his or her knowledge about reading and reading development and what the research says and what effective instruction looks like, but also to collaborate with one another at the school level and create a culture, a school culture, and if I may say, a school effect, not just a teacher effect when it comes to teacher knowledge about literacy. And I believe if we have a school effect, we will have a student effect. So that's one area that I would advise teachers about. Another area, which is an area that I'm a little biased on that because I have a particular interest in family literacy. You know, we look at so many aspects of literacy development and all of them very, very important. But I believe that a catalyst for school-wide literacy efforts and improvements is also family literacy, and it's an area that is often neglected. That we cannot just talk about effective classroom instruction and success at the school level without supporting and creating bridges and connections with home and supporting the literacy development of our students at home and incorporating and including families and the wealth of knowledge that families bring into our curriculum. So I would really lobby for, if I may say that, for creating and sustaining effective literacy family literacy programs at our schools.
I think that's fabulous. Maybe you're familiar with some work that Dan Lordy did in the 70s. He published an article where he equated classrooms to eggs in the individual compartments in an egg crate. And I often think about that when you go into schools. Teachers close their doors and you don't know what's going on in the room next to you.
Exactly.
And I've encouraged teachers in schools where I've had the opportunity to visit to get out of the egg crate and to create an omelet. And to break the shell and to mix themselves up. And I think that that analogy also works with family literacy. That sometimes parents say, well, that's something that happened at school. And there's not the integration and the richness of bringing what happens at school into the home and what happens in the home into the school. And I think we can build stronger family literacy programs if people would integrate the two rather than thinking of them as individual compartments in the egg crate.
Absolutely, absolutely, I agree with you. Now, I'd like to ask you a question. You have been involved in different kinds of research and you have such great knowledge when it comes to language learners and English language learners, language acquisition. You've spoken so much about fluency and so many other areas that we need to support and develop with our students. But how about metacognition? Is there anything that you can tell us about how can we support the metacognitive development of our second language learners? And what message would you give to a classroom teacher? What could she do to strengthen the metacognition of second language learners?
I think that it's very important for teachers to take opportunities to step away from a learning activity and talk about how did we learn how to do this, and engage the learners in a meaningful discussion about how did we just learn what we learned. And I think that sometimes we just assume that learning is happening in the class and we don't engage the learners in that rich discussion of what have we just learned about this process. I think engaging the students in those metacognitive and reflective activities will help to narrow the gap between a learner's perceived perception of their ability and their actual ability level. I think that there are mismatches sometimes. I think very good learners often underestimate how well they're doing in learning, and poorer learners overestimate their ability. But if we can have those meaningful discussions with learners, pause at particular points and say, how did we just do this? What have you learned from this process? How is what we've done today similar to what we did last week or last month? That it provides that rich opportunity for the students to engage in discussions about learning and how to learn how to learn.
Absolutely.
And those discussions, I think, are some of the most beneficial in classrooms.
Absolutely. You know, the research talks about comprehension development and how to support it, and we know so much about encouraging think alouds and helping our students develop, generate their own questions, and how to formulate critical questions. And then we are also so interested, of course, in results and gains and everything else. And we, in a way, sometimes we speed up so much the learning process. And we need to kind of put on the brakes in order to do what you described and to help our students become metacognitive. You need to put on the brakes a little bit and make the comprehension process visible and tangible to the student. And as you said, encourage them to make connections and see how it relates to other types of learning. That's what makes learning fun.
Absolutely.
And it makes it stick, because we're looking at transfer of learning. But for meaning to, if I may use those words, stick and be able to be transferred, we have to create those metacognitive types of experiences and help our teachers to learn how to teach in a metacognitive fashion.
I agree. If we want metacognitively aware learners, we've got to have metacognitively aware teachers.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Dr. Anderson, of course, we have different types of research that we have learned from about second language acquisition, second language learners, types of instruction. In your opinion, what kind of research do we still need?
I'm a language teacher that really thrives on answering questions based on research. And I think that there are so many things that we can learn from each other about how to improve what we do in the classroom based on research findings. I think, as I mentioned earlier, that one of the areas that's really important for research to focus on is the integration of text type, task type, and second language reading. So let's look at how one second language reading may change based on what the task is that we've asked them to do, or the text type that we're asking them to engage in. And then we can't forget the other two very important issues of what is the second language proficiency of the learner, as well as the first language reading ability of the learner. So I think that if we could look at those 5 issues together, second language reading ability, second language proficiency, first language reading ability, text that the learner is reading, and the task that we've asked them to do with the text, and see what the relationship is among those 5 variables. We still have so much to learn about how we can better help second language learners. And I think the next steps for us will involve careful examination of the text types as well as the task types.
Wonderful. We need it. It's an area that is uncultivated, if I may say, in research.
That's a perfect
definitely.
word there. And how about for you? If you could set a research agenda for a school, for a teacher, or for the nation, what are some issues that you would want to make sure specifically get addressed?
I'm particularly interested in older readers because there's a lot of evidence with older readers in the areas of vocabulary and comprehension and how much they struggle. A number of our older readers, as we know from research. And I'm particularly interested in the so-called fluent older readers who are still struggling in the area of comprehension, or who are not performing in standardized testing or other types of testing where they're expected to be performing. I would like to know how the role of fluency and oral fluency in comprehension. I have been working for a number of years in high schools in intensive reading classrooms, and I have seen hundreds upon hundreds of students who are so-called fluent readers who have very limited comprehension. And I think we really need to look a lot at the role of oral fluency and comprehension. We have a lot of assessments, and we have a push for a lot of assessments, especially in the secondary grades, but we're not getting the results that we expected to be getting in the area of comprehension. So comprehension is an area that we really need to explore, and the role of oral fluency in the secondary grades in the area of comprehension.
That's why I think it's so important when we discuss the concept of fluency that we don't divorce rate from comprehension.
Absolutely.
We've got to have the combination of both rate and comprehension when we talk about fluency.
Of course. And how prosody affects our understanding also.
Absolutely.
There's so much emphasis on the speed and the accuracy that we may have students who are fast and reading it accurately, but they're not comprehending. They're not understanding what they're reading. So that's a great area of demand in terms of research with the older reader and comprehension.
I think the easiest way to assess oral fluency is to get the learner to read out loud. You can tell when you hear someone read if they're fluent or not.
Of course.
But like you mentioned, we don't know if they've understood what they've read, so we've got to introduce that aspect. But as I tell most teachers, if you want good fluent oral readers, let's make sure that they're good fluent silent readers first. I think we're so focused on the assessments that we have to give in the school systems, where we have students read out loud, that we're not thinking of effective pedagogical practice of how do we get the learner to the point that they can be a good fluent oral reader.
Absolutely. And a lot of our students will say, well, I read it, and I read it fast, and I didn't make any errors. But when it comes to those critical questions, and as you were talking about earlier on, that metacognitive aspect, that critical thinking, what did I learn, how does it connect with other types of texts I might have read, that's where the gap exists. So you have a reader who's reading fluently, but a reader who's not understanding nor making connections, nor he or she are able to transfer that when they take an assessment or do an oral presentation of what they read. And that is a very critical area, especially as we look at the state of our nation and our students in terms of NAEP results or other kind of results that we have in the area of comprehension. We have a tremendous need in helping our teachers become more knowledgeable about effective fluency development at the secondary level, and also effective comprehension instruction at the secondary level.